Friday morning, to be exact.
What is it again?
And once again, Friday morning.
Don't forget
Daylight savings time. Spring forward.
Lost hour of sleep.
Spring forward.
Should we or shouldn't we turn the clocks ahead?
Daylight saving time begins this Sunday, and the clocks will spring forward by 1 hour.
An hour? We don't have an hour.
Daylight saving time.
It's showtime, baby.
It is, 4:11 here at the Mighty 790 KF show. Derek Hansen in for Dan Michaels on this Friday, and we lose an hour of sleep, but there are worse things. It means it's going to be lighter later. That's the good news there. Derek Hansen in for Dan. Paulie Lyons producing. Let's get right to it. We have a great guest on right now, and she is the author of a new book, American Cyberspace, Trials and the Path to Trust. What is true these days, honestly? Major General Mary Eder is with us, U.S. Army retired, former Army Deputy Chief of Public Affairs, and has served as the Director of Public Affairs at the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies. Has really got a great background in communications. So, Major Eder, thanks so much for being with us. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to be there. Thank you.
Yes, welcome. It's actually pretty pleasant here in Fargo, North Dakota. You know, we got mid-40s after a little snow. It was 50s last week. We got shorts going on. It's great.
Last time I was there, it wasn't so great.
Really?
That's good.
So you've been up here a few times before then?
I have.
Well, cool. Well, it's great. Did you like it? Was it warm, or did you ever get here in the summer at least?
I came in April, so I got a little bit of everything at once.
Yeah, that's true. April is, pick a day, pick a season. We get all 4 seasons in one. April and October can give you that around here. That is for sure. You and I talked a little bit off the air, and we both have communications backgrounds, and I think there's been a little frustration for people like you and I who have been doing it for a while, and the fact that we're used to our traditional media, the broadcast news, whether it be radio, TV side, the print media, and now the world of cyberspace has come in. I graduated college about the mid-'90s when it just started to influx. But now it's just like on steroids, right? And I think my frustration is now everyone thinks that they have their own little talk show or editorial on Facebook or Twitter, and it's really kind of messed everything up. What's your take on
it? There are certainly proliferating sources of information, and whether or not they're not worthwhile, but whether or not they add to the discourse is really the question, isn't it? Because we don't have time for all of this.
No. Well, that's a very good point. Headline grabbing and then feeding off the emotion. Because would you say that people always have emotion whenever they would see news items or read stories or whatever? But, boy, that's really because I think people see that. They don't really read the whole story, so they're not getting all the information. But I think, we talk about getting clicks all the time, and that really has become a problem. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think right about the time you were going through journalism school was when we were starting to see this tendency for celebrity news coverage creep into regular news. And if you would ask editors about why are you covering these things, they would say, well, people want it. Well, we don't always want to eat our vegetables either, but sometimes they're good for us. And so we've continued this downhill slide into simply looking at things that are sensational, or as you said, have that emotional appeal, or trying to get a reaction or a result, rather than simply informing us without all of the baggage.
That's true. Do you think it started when I was in college? Nancy Kerrigan, Tanya Harding? I mean, that's been brought up a lot, or was it OJ? I mean, all kind of within the same time period, really.
I think that's really it, because right about when you had the car chase with OJ in Los Angeles was the first time you had the capability for news outlets, television news outlets, to put up a helicopter and cover something live. So you saw all of that live, which really didn't happen much before that. And in 1989, we got to the 24-hour news cycle. So now there's a huge space to fill. So things like that took hours to cover really helped fill that gap.
That's a very good point. And you mentioned it. When I think about the trial of the century and I think about those things, and then imagine what that would be like today. And obviously about 3 hours from here, we're going to have another kind of trial that everyone will be focusing on. Cameras in courts. I mean, that really has changed the world too, hasn't it?
It has. And I'll tell you about the time that we're talking about the OJ trial and the Tanya Harding issue and some of these sensationalism sensationalized stories. And what that did for Americans at large was create a sense of community. Because what else community did we have at that time? What else could you fly to Chicago, get in a taxi, and talk about? Hey, what do you think about that trial? And everybody knew how to comment on it because it was ubiquitous and it was everywhere. And we're so fragmented now, we don't have much in common to discuss unless it's politics, and then that is polarized.
Well, that's a very good point. And do you think, my theory has been, compared to what I learned in journalism, I really feel like many of these, especially the corporate, as far as the corporate news outlets, the cable news networks, so I don't even think they're news right now. I think it's more or less, talk shows on the TV more than anything else. But they're playing to those clicks, playing to the emotions of partisanship instead of actually trying to look for the truth and trying to, get it out there so people can kind of decide for themselves. They're kind of fitting the narrative.
Fitting the narrative or creating a narrative.
Shaping, I should say. Shaping is the way I should have said it. Yeah.
Okay. Shaping the narrative or creating a polarization and creating a have and have not, creating a yes or no, creating some dissension and discussion. That's what it's about.
That's a very good point, because for me, I'm all over the place politically, so I guess, and I can't have a real, within the past year and change, maybe even going back longer than that, I just can't have a normal conversation with someone who's very, polarized, and it's hard. I think that's one of the more frustrating things for me is there's just no middle ground anymore.
The lack of middle ground, I think, comes from a lack of, certainly behaving in polite society the way we did 20 years ago. And even then, it probably wasn't to the level that our grandparents would approve of. But even 20 years ago, it was much more polite than what we would see now and much more considerate. But where we are with our language, where we are with our trust in others and trust in truth and institutions is certainly something I look at in depth. But I think it also goes to a lack of common sense. We rush to judgment, which is something we've learned from watching all of this excessive, sensationalized news. There's a rush to judgment and then unforgiveness. Well, they didn't tell us about this about masks. Well, maybe if they'd said, look, let's just say this. We don't know what we're facing right now. We're going to do this for a few days. We're going to keep checking, and we'll let you know. If somebody just said, we'll tell you as soon as we know, it's going to change, I think we might have a different take on it than watching guidance change every few days with no explanation.
Boy, that's a very good point, because I've said to so many people within the last week, the problem is Americans want absolutes, right? And then we don't get all the information. And it's because I think the people who are trying to give us the information know that we want absolutes, so they try to give us absolutes, and then it looks like they're contradicting themselves from something they said before, and it just becomes this big spin cycle.
It does, because we don't let it stop, and we go from crisis to crisis. So what we're seeing in our overload of information, what I call the information apocalypse, is just this sensationalized crisis and another crisis, and we never finish a story. We don't know what's happening right now in Houston with people still recovering from the hurricanes last year, or California from the wildfires.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point. Yeah, it just you're right. You move on to the next thing, and that's happened for quite some time. Major General Mary Eder is with us, author of American Cyberspace, Trials and the Path to Trust. What can we do to slow this down? I mean, can it happen in the age of Twitter and Facebook and all the other things that are out there on the internet, or as quick as just, going onto an app on your phone?
I think what we are doing and what we're starting to see is our sources are changing. Facebook, there's nothing that's too big to fail or change or be replaced. So we're going to see replacements, and we're also going to see, I think, more regulation of big tech. As much as big tech says, we don't need to do that. We've just seen the issue with Facebook in Australia with paying for news.
Right.
If we don't pay for news, we're not going to get the news that we want.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, I'm mixed on that Facebook thing, because I think even in we use Facebook a lot too, if you know what I mean, because it can help us too. I mean, it seems like a partnership in many ways, but I guess they have to balance out that partnership, but they don't want to get it too far in Australia. Or how is that working?
Rather than be regulated by the government, what Facebook did was agree to pay some of the news organizations. We'll see more of this coming, I'm sure. This was just a first skirmish in what's going to be a long series of battles over news sources versus platforms. And most people don't see a difference.
Well, that's yeah. That's a
if
very
it's
good.
Out there, it must be news.
Right, and that is a huge problem, isn't it? Let me.
It really is.
Because I think more than anything, it used to be just the confusion between the op-ed section and the news section, right? And now that's really been amplified 10 times over.
Oh, everything is the same size. If you had an old-time newspaper, what was important was on the front page, and what wasn't very important was on the back pages. And what you see now, perhaps in an evening newscast, is everything's the same size. It's 5 to 7 stories, and all of the outlets cover the same thing. So you're not getting variety. You're not getting anything else. And in that long, large gap of what's on all through the day, it's the same things over and over. When there's certainly time to educate us about things like, what does a fake news site look like? What do bots and trolls look like? How do you recognize scams? So there could be a public service in all of this that we're not seeing.
My final thing for you, what's your take on their private entities? They can do it, but I always think, hey, whether it's true or not, whether it's a stretch of anything, if people see something on a platform, let people decide, do their research. But, when you have YouTube and Facebook, whatever, kind of do their own fact checking and kind of tell you what may or may not be real and kind of picking and choosing. Is that healthy? Do you think that should be done, or what do you think on that?
I'd rather see an independent entity taking looks at these things. There's a number of sites now that do check for factual accuracy. And we're also seeing a rise in universities with organizations within them that take a look at what fake news looks like, what altered video looks like. One is at the University of Washington, and they have a Center of Public Discourse that takes a look at all of these things across their platforms from within the university, from all different schools. And so they're trying to help educate. There's a couple of other companies that are doing this. We're going to see more of this because they see a need for it. There may not be a demand yet, but they're seeing the need.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because that is something that really gets a lot of people under their skin. That is for sure. Major General Mary Eder, thanks so much for being with us. We'll have to check it out. Amazon, you can get your book in other places?
Yeah, Amazon and Barnes & Noble, any place where books are sold, and some of them in, I think, the real bookstores that we can still go in and browse and learn and see all kinds of different things and not have it pushed at it.
I love it. Thanks so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. We'll talk to you again hopefully soon.
I hope so. Thank you.
You bet. Again, Major General Mary Eder with us. Again, the book, American Cyberspace, Trials and Path to Trust. This day and age, what is true? It's a very good question. We'll talk about it if you want. 237-5948. Derek Hansen in for Dan Michaels.
You're listening to The Drive with Dan Michaels.
I guess I was going about 65 top.